Hey everyone, it's Alexander, the real Mr. Robinson. Welcome to the channel. So another year has come and gone, and I think I speak for every single person on planet Earth when I say, fuck you 2020. I know that doesn't sit well with the YouTube advertisers, but I think I'm entitled to say that. Between the pandemic, the millions of lives lost because of it, and the excruciating 2020 election, even though it ended in a good way, this year has been an absolute shit show, and it can go screw itself. But in terms of movies, it's been an underwhelming year for movies. And again, because of the pandemic, a lot of movies that people were looking forward to got pushed back or got sent to streaming or VOD. So it was a pretty uneventful year. And I've spent most of my time watching older classic movies rather than newer releases. So this year is going to be a little different with the top 10 or bottom 10, which in this case I'm reducing each list to 5 and putting them into one video. So in the tradition of my channel, and the sooner we get the worst of out of the way the better, here is my list for the top 5 worst movies of 2020. So again, because I didn't see a lot of new releases this year, I decided to trim my worst of list down to 5. But here are a couple of movies that would have ended up on my list had I decided to go the full 10. You can find the full list on my Letterboxd account along with the best of 2020. But just to name off a few movies, we've got the live-action adaptation of Mulan, which is so generic, so bland, and just uneventful. I may have argued in favor of the $30 price point for Disney Plus Premium Access, but the fact that HBO Max let us see Wonder Woman 1984 with no additional charge makes me a little more mad that I had to pay extra money just to see Mulan. Then we also have Scoob, which I thought would be a lot of fun, and while it does capture some of the elements of the original show, the fact that they tried to cram in other Hanna-Barbera characters and create a cinematic universe got irritating really quickly. Hillbilly Elegy is another one that would have made my list had I decided to do 10, and I'll get into reasons why it's not in the top 5 later. But probably the most controversial pick for what I think are one of the worst movies of the year is First Cow. Such a pretentious, long, and drawn-out movie. I hesitate to call it a movie because it's just more of a series of events. I'm sorry, I don't like this movie at all. I acknowledge that it's well made, but it is boring as hell. And then of course there's going to be the big disappointment of 2020. And it's easy to say that this year had a lot of disappointments, but I think the disappointments come again from the fact that we were looking forward to so many movies that got pushed to next year. But for me, in terms of the movies that did come out this year, the biggest disappointment is Christopher Nolan's Tenet. Wonder Woman's getting a lot of controversy and people are calling that the biggest disappointment of the year, but for me, Tenet is such a major letdown. There's still a lot to admire about this movie. The score is incredible, the use of practical effects over visual effects is just commendable, the performances are really great, and I still feel like Christopher Nolan is very ambitious as a director, and this is certainly an ambitious film, but at the same time, this movie is ambitious to a fault, and I feel like Nolan needs a writing partner. He needs somebody who can fine-tune the script and make it make more sense, because this script is flat out garbage. Along with The Dark Knight Rises, it's my least favorite Christopher Nolan film, and unfortunately, as time goes on, it's going to have the big reputation of that big blockbuster that tried to get released in theaters during a pandemic in an attempt to save theaters, but only made matters worse. So, I really wanted to love this movie, but I was sorely disappointed. So now with all that out of the way, let's actually get into the bottom 5. And we're going to kick things off with number 5. Rebecca. Originally, Hillbilly Elegy was at the number 5 slot, but I decided to bump it off because it's an easy target. I mean, is it one of the worst movies of the year? Absolutely, I think it is. But it's just too easy to pick on. It's like an obvious choice. for a worst of list, and there are some things in it that I actually do like in Hillbilly Elegy. Rebecca is just such wasted potential, and it's a thriller that comes across as unintentionally funny. It's not very suspenseful, it's awkwardly directed. The look of the film, while it's nice, it doesn't really stand out like other period pieces. And Lily James is the only actor that manages to get out of this movie with some sort of dignity. Everyone else in this movie tries their best, but they fall flat on their face. This was a big disappointment, but admittedly there are a lot of unintentionally funny moments, like in Hillbilly Elegy. Except, unlike Hillbilly Elegy, I don't think anything in this movie was actually good. Number 4. Lovebirds. Back in the old days when we went to see movies in theaters, I remember seeing this trailer at practically every showing that I went to, and I thought to myself, this could either be really funny or really terrible. And unfortunately, it fell into the latter category, because there's nothing worse than a comedy that is trying to be funny, but just actively irritates you. And that's what this movie did. The two leads do have some good chemistry when the movie starts out, and it actually feels somewhat grounded. But once the plot actually kicks in, it's nothing but these actors trying to improv their way out of scenes, and it's just not funny. This movie really needed a solid script. The fact that it was from the same director as The Big Sick just makes me sad. That hurts me inside, that one of my favorite movies of the best year of the last decade was directed by the guy who directed this garbage. Number 3. Dolittle. Robert Downey Jr.'s first big movie after retiring from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. You're going to see this movie pop up on a lot of other worst of lists, probably at the number 1 spot, just because, yeah, it is that bad. I mean, it's a generic talking animal movie, but the fact that it cost so much and had so many named actors behind it makes it even worse. And much like with Lovebirds, it tries to be funny non-stop with these talking animals, and you're just flat out annoyed. The plot doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's mind-boggling the amount of money that went into this movie, as I said beforehand. And the big finale of the film, where Dolittle has to pull something out of a dragon's ass, no. Ignoring the fact that a mythological creature such as a dragon is coexisting amongst these other real-world animals, this ending is just, wow. Yeah, I could see why so many people say that this is the worst movie of 2020. But not for me. There are 2 other movies that I think are slightly worse than Dolittle, but Dolittle's pushing it. Number 2. The Grudge, which also happened to be the very first movie that came out in the new decade. And what a way to start the decade and the year. Yeah, this movie is just your typical January crappy horror movie. It comes out, people see it on the first weekend, it makes some money, and then people forget about it. And the times they do think about it, like in my case, they go, oh, that was really bad. But what makes this movie at number 2 is the ending. I remember seeing this movie in the theaters, and when the movie ended with our main character getting dragged away by the creature, because spoilers, the creature did survive, it cuts to an establishing shot of the main character's house, and that shot holds for a good 10 seconds, and then the credits roll. And as soon as the credits rolled, there was one guy in the theater that went, "Are you kidding me?" out loud, and the entire audience burst into laughing because of that one guy. So that one guy, whoever you were, seeing that movie at Universal City Walk 2020, I applaud you for making this movie a little more enjoyable, or at least a little more memorable. So that's the number 2 movie. What could possibly be number 1? Well, it occupies the same genre as The Grudge, but does everything that The Grudge did far worse. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you number 1. The Turning. The Grudge may have had a terrible, terrible ending, but it had an ending. It had an established ending, no matter how bad it was. The Turning just fades away to credits. The ending to this movie is so flat out insulting. The fact that they try to build it up as if there's a big conclusion, only to reveal that the conclusion we were watching is of the main character hallucinating. And then at the point where you think, oh, we're actually going to see what happens afterwards, and no, credits. Credits roll, we don't even get a conclusion to this movie, and wow. On top of all that, it's a completely generic haunted house movie with terrible acting. Mackenzie Davis does try the best that she can, but she really can't save this movie. And Finn Wolfhard from It and Stranger Things is terrible in this movie. All the kids are terrible, they're obnoxious. I didn't think a horror movie in 2020 could be any worse than The Grudge, but The Turning managed to rise up to the challenge and replace The Grudge as my absolute worst movie of 2020. And there you go, that's my list for the top 5 worst movies of 2020. So now we're going to head into the opposite direction and talk about what I think are the top 5 best movies of 2020. If you're new to the channel, the reason I always do my worst of list before my best of list is because I want to end the previous year and go into the new year with a positive outlook. And that is most certainly the case with 2020. But before we actually get into the best of 2020, I'm going to have a change of shirts because I want to wear something that brings me joy rather than makes me think about shit. So give me 1 second to change my shirt. There we go. Normally I don't like to wear these themed shirts in reviews unless it fits with whatever I'm reviewing, but in this case I just need to think about something that I love. But getting back into this list, before we actually get started, I want to talk about the movies that would have made my list had I decided to do a full top 10. Some of these movies I've reviewed on the channel and some of them I haven't gone around to reviewing. On the Rocks by Sofia Coppola is a great father-daughter movie. Bill Murray and Rashida Jones are just fantastic together. It's funny, it's heartfelt, it's very realistic. I dug it quite a bit. Freaky was a really big, fun surprise, even if it was pretty much Freaky Friday meets Friday the 13th. Onward, the other Pixar movie that came out this year, which I'm still sad that this movie isn't as beloved as I thought it would be, but hey, whatever. I love this movie. You can sue me for that opinion. Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn. Once you get past the fact that it's not really a Birds of Prey movie as much as it's a Harley Quinn movie, I think it's a lot of fun. It's a great, interesting, original film from DC. And next to the original Wonder Woman, this is my favorite in the DC Extended Universe. Wonder Woman is certainly the better movie, but Birds of Prey is probably the one that I'll end up rewatching more as time goes on. David Fincher's Mank is such a great movie that I'm sad that it's not in my top 5 because I think it's brilliantly shot, the actors are phenomenal, the score's fantastic. It really reminds me a lot of The Artist in the sense that it's a modern movie made like it's a movie from the 1940s, and I absolutely love it. And then I have to give a special mention to the movie The Way Back, starring Ben Affleck, which was the last movie I saw in the theaters before everything went downhill. It's a generic high school sports movie, all things considered, but Ben Affleck is so good in this role that it makes this movie better than it really has any right to be. His performance is incredible. I hope it gets some award recognition because he's that good, and I can't wait for the day we get to see movies in theaters again. And now we get into the big surprise of 2020, the movie that I was really not looking forward to at all, but saw it and ended up liking it quite a bit. It wouldn't end up on a best of list, but it's still worth mentioning, and that's Bad Boys for Life. Maybe it has to deal with the fact that I saw this movie right after seeing Dolittle at City Walk, but I thought this movie was a lot of fun, had some great kick-ass action. Will Smith and Martin Lawrence are fantastic together. I still haven't seen the first 2 Bad Boys, and the reason for that is just because I'm not a fan of Michael Bay, but after seeing how fun this movie was, I'm willing to give those first 2 Bad Boys movies a chance. So one day I'll get around to those, but for right now, I really dig Bad Boys for Life, which is the highest grossing movie of 2020. So those are my honorable mentions and the surprise of the year. Now let's actually get into this list, starting with number 5. Save Yourselves. I knew nothing about this movie going in. The only reason I even knew about it was because it got mentioned to me when I was talking about Love and Monsters. So I ended up watching this, and it was very charming, very quirky. The two actors are great together. It's a funny take on an alien invasion movie that's done on a very limited budget, but it's not overly goofy, and it takes the situation seriously enough to where you can be invested and you aren't distracted by all the jokes or the comedy. It's a ton of fun, it's very charming as I mentioned beforehand, and the second I found out that this movie was already on Blu-ray, I picked it up just because I loved it that much. Number 4. Promising Young Woman. This movie is such a roller coaster ride in the sense that it will leave you on the edge of your seat. It juggles many different aspects like comedy and thriller, but it works so beautifully. It's got a very tight script. Carey Mulligan is just fantastic in this role. And the ending is both shocking and incredibly satisfying. This is one of those rare cases where a movie debuts at Sundance that gets beloved by everyone that sees it, and I just think, okay, well, how good could it actually be? With all the hype going on for a year, almost a full year, is it really going to live up to it? The answer is yes. If you can't see Promising Young Woman right now, just wait for it to come out on VOD because I assure you, it is worth your time. Number 3. The Invisible Man. After 2 previous attempts to try to remake their classic movie monsters, Universal finally got it right with The Invisible Man. And in my opinion, I think this remake is a superior version to the original 1933 film. That movie is still a classic, don't get me wrong, but this movie is in every sense of the word a horror movie. Elizabeth Moss is absolutely fantastic in the role. Lee Whannell directs and writes the hell out of this movie. It's suspenseful. It's incredibly satisfying. It pretty much hits all the same beats that Promising Young Woman does, except it's in a horror movie. And out of the few movies that I saw in theaters this year, The Invisible Man was the theater experience that I cherished the most, just because the audience was really into it. And seeing this movie in a theater really made the suspense that much better, and shows the power of a theatrical experience. Number 2. Palm Springs. Is the plot of this movie Groundhog Day? Sure. Is it bad because of it? Absolutely not. More than any other movie this year, I think Palm Springs perfectly captures the mentality that everyone was going through this year, where every day seemed to be on repeat, and you just try to make the most of it. Andy Samberg and Kristen Milotti are fantastic together. The situations they find themselves in are hilarious. They're fantastical, but there is a fantasy element to this movie since, Groundhog Day, and it's just a lot of fun. It was actually pretty rare to find movies this year that really brought joy to me, and Palm Springs was definitely one of them. And for the longest time, it was actually my favorite movie of 2020, but lo and behold, something else came up, and that something else is... Number 1. Soul. I just reviewed this movie yesterday, and I will still stand by the fact that it is the best movie of the year. It is such a beautiful work of art from Pixar. It doesn't talk down to kids at all with its subject matter, but at the same time, it doesn't make it to a point where kids will be bored. The performances are fantastic from Jamie Foxx, Tina Fey, Rachel House. The score is absolutely fantastic, and it really shows Pixar at its very finest. Pete Docter's movies just keep getting better as they go on. Monsters, Inc. was great, Up was phenomenal, Inside Out was better, and Soul is his best movie. Considering how awful this year has been and how much it just sucked the life out of people, the ending to Soul gave me a positive outlook on the future. And much like with Joe when he's given a second chance at life, I'm gonna live every minute of it. And for all that, it's why Soul is my favorite movie of 2020. And there you go, that's my list for the top 5 worst and best movies of 2020. Here's to a hopeful 2021. Things seem to be looking better on the horizon, but we can't be comfortable with it. It's not going to automatically change as soon as midnight comes around. We have to work at making next year a better year, and I think next year will be a better year. I have a positive outlook on it, and especially when it comes to this channel, I think things are going to turn out just fine. I've got a lot of stuff planned for this channel. I have some stuff planned for my Patreon page. I'm starting to experiment with Twitch, so you can go to the Twitch account and see my schedule that I've set up. But until then, I want to know what you guys think about these movies that I picked. Do you agree with these lists? Do you disagree? What are some of your favorite and least favorite movies of 2020? Whatever the case may be, let me know in the comments below. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, leave a comment, support my Patreon page, follow me on social media, and until then, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there is only one.